to managing food allergies. And this webinar, hope this is the one that you thought you signed up for, because here you are, and we're so glad that you're here. Really quickly, we're going to talk a little bit about some closed captioning stuff, just so that you know if you need it, how to enable it. There should be a little area where you can turn that on your device so you can see what we're saying. And you don't even have to listen to us talk. You can read it if that is more preferable to you. I totally understand. And really quickly too, we're going to do a couple introductions, and I guess I will start since I'm jabbering. My name is Susie West. I'm an extension educator. I'm based out of the Andover regional office, and my primary area of work tends to focus around healthy food access, but I have food allergies, and so here I am talking to y'all today. I'm gonna pass it over to Amy.
Good afternoon. My name's Amy Johnston. I am a food safety extension educator, so support the state, based out of our Dakota County office. So thank you for joining us today.
And then we have our beautiful, fabulous, wonderful webinar producer, Rose. I want to see like hand clapping emojis for Rose, because Rose is going to help us so much with monitoring the chat box. She's a great troubleshooter. If you're having an issue with something, I am not very helpful. Rose is a Zoom wizard. And so make sure that if you're struggling with something, you can send her a direct message, or you can throw it in the chat, and she can help hopefully get that sorted out for you. So on to the content. All right. So food allergies are really pretty common, which if you're here, you probably are, you might be aware of that roughly 1 in 10 adults and 1 in 13 kids has a food allergy. And we also know that they are increasing, and we're seeing more of them come up. You can see this one statistic that, claim lines with diagnosis of anaphylactic food reactions increased 377% in like 10 years between 2007 and 2016. And there's a lot of theories about why we're seeing more food allergies now than we did before. There's a lot of theories. There's a lot of theories about that. There's some things about, we're seeing other autoimmune disorders increase, things like eczema, which can be related to that. There's talk about the microbiome and how, the uses of antibiotics and different kinds of things, changing our gut biome and our skin biome. But then we know that, for a long time, the recommendation was to avoid introducing potential food allergens to children. And now we know that early introduction is actually very key for preventing the development of food allergies. So there might be we're seeing maybe kind of some of the effects of avoiding those early introductions now, which might be why we're seeing more food allergies increasing. So lots of theories about that, and they can develop at any age. Hi, I am an adult, and I went 26 years of my life eating cheese, like not every day, but eating cheese. And then when I was 26, developed a dairy allergy, and it was life-shattering. So they can happen at any time. They're really common, though, for both adults and children. And there is kind of this misconception that, kids are more likely to outgrow food allergies, and that's unfortunately not the case. Depending on the allergen, only about 15 to 20% of kids end up outgrowing that food allergy. They tend to be something that sticks around for life. And so it's really important to know how to manage those things going forward. And so we're going to talk to y'all about that today, as well as how to kind of navigate some of the stress associated with having food allergies or caring for somebody who has food allergies. So what even is a food allergy? There's a lot of talk about, what's a food allergy, what is an intolerance or a food sensitivity. And then we have things like celiac disease, and they're all totally different. So a food allergy is when your body interprets a certain component of food as a threat, and it activates your immune system. It's an immune system response to that food. It could be a protein. There's some new research that indicates that it might not be the protein, actually. There could be multiple components of foods that people are allergic to. And so lots of interesting things about that, but it activates your immune system, and then your immune system could cause multiple different systems in your body to react. So there was a question about, what does an allergic reaction look like? What do you do about it? Because it is an immune system response and it can activate multiple different parts. It can activate your skin. You might get hives or like flushing, like a rash, almost like a sunburn. Can activate the gut, could result in vomiting or diarrhea, really upset stomach, could cause respiratory distress, circulatory issues with your heart, could cause swelling of the face, but it doesn't always, I say it doesn't always, a lot of the time, actually, allergic reactions don't show up the way that they're characterized in like the media, right? I think about like the movie Hitch, and like half of his face swells up, right? And you're like, oh my God, what's happening? It doesn't always look that way. But when you have three different systems activated, three different like bodily systems activated at the same time, that is what we call anaphylaxis. So it could be increased heart rate, increased trouble breathing, and hives is anaphylaxis. Anaphylaxis is not always, face swelling, that kind of thing. It can look very different, and it could look different every single time you're exposed to the allergen. It's not always going to be the same type of reaction every time. So food allergies too are very serious. They have the potential to be deadly. Anaphylaxis is life-threatening, and it's really important that appropriate care is taken, and the only appropriate treatment for anaphylaxis is epinephrine. Antihistamines are not enough to reverse an anaphylactic reaction, and it's very, very important that when anaphylaxis is present, that you go to the emergency department immediately. Do not try to handle it at home with, an inhaler or Benadryl. That is not going to cut it. It's always better to go to the emergency department, because there can be delayed reaction even after you give an EpiPen. Always go to the emergency department for continuous monitoring, because it could come back in a few hours. Our bodies are really weird. We don't really understand. So it's always better to be in a care setting if you suspect anaphylaxis. Food allergies are also diagnosed and identified with the help of an allergist or immunologist, and that's going to take multiple forms of testing in order to identify that. A skin prick test is not diagnostic in and of itself. In the same way that a blood serum test is not diagnostic in and of itself, the gold standards for determining if somebody has a food allergy or not is potentially one of those tests. So like I had skin prick testing and I had blood serum testing done, as well as doing blinded oral challenges to the food, which is terrifying because we just talked about anaphylaxis. So that is done with the help of an allergist or immunologist in office. Food intolerances and food sensitivities are a little bit different, because your body is unable to break down a certain component in a food, whether that's like sulfites, which can be really irritating for people, or the most common one, which is lactose. When your body is unable to digest the guts, your little gut system is unable to digest the sugars in milk, and that creates this really uncomfortable digestive symptom reaction, bloating, gas, diarrhea. Very generally, like 99.9% of the time, not life-threatening. There are a couple of intolerances that are very specialized diagnostic that require work with an allergist or immunologist. Those are very separate, that I'm not qualified to talk about. We don't have time for. But in general, 99.99% of the time, intolerances or food sensitivities are not life-threatening. And then we have something like celiac disease, which is what a lot of people refer to as a gluten allergy, and that is an autoimmune disorder that causes damage to the small intestine when gluten is consumed, and that's a protein found in grains. And I will say, backtracking a little bit for intolerances and sensitivities, There's no consensus or diagnostic test for food intolerances or sensitivities, with the exception of lactose and fructose. Those two do have tests available for them, but those like online food sensitivity tests are not diagnostic. They're not scientifically proven. It's a really good way to waste $300 though. Like it's please don't. Please spend the $300 and go do a consult with an allergist or an immunologist if you're concerned about food sensitivities. Those measure a protein, or those measure a component called IgG, which is immunoglobulin G, which is actually a sign that your body is able to process a food or that you have just consumed that food. So those are not scientifically based. I beg of you, please do not. Celiac disease is diagnosed with an allergist or immunologist as well. And I want to also recommend that if you do suggest if you think you have a food allergy or a sensitivity, a gluten allergy, don't start eliminating foods unnecessarily either, because that can cause some other things, can cause some undue stress, could lead to nutrient deficiencies, and it, like I said, very stressful. Okay, next, we're gonna do a little true or false. Oh, wow, I already gave you guys the answer. So perfect. Let's see what if the next animation work. Okay, so it is true that current US law requires that food labels identify food sources, or identify the food source names of all major food allergens used to make a product. What are those 9 major allergens? So there are 9 major allergens now. In January 2023, we added sesame as a top allergen to milk, eggs, fish, crustacean, tree nuts, peanuts, wheat, and soy. Those are the top 9 allergens, and they account for about 90% of major allergic reactions and are required to be labeled on foods. But any food can cause an allergic reaction. These are just the 9 most common ones, and others aren't required to be identified. So like, I'm allergic to green beans. That's not required to be labeled on foods in bold or identified and labeled that way. I'm also allergic to black pepper. So like, we're going to talk about this when we look at some examples of food labels. So, you know, I have to be very, very cautious with reading labels. So it's really important that we're reading the entire food label, the entire ingredients list, and not just checking for those 9 major allergens. I actually had somebody say, well, you can't be allergic to coconut because it's not one of the ones that's labeled. And I was like, actually, you can be allergic to anything. I learned at 26 years old, once upon a time. All right, let's see if my next one works. I did it again. I gave you guys the answer again. This was supposed to be like fun and like true or false. What's the answer? So federal labeling requires food producers to identify the potential presence of major allergens that are not used in manufacturing of a finished product. So like, they have to identify if, you know, there might be peanuts present in this product, even though peanuts aren't an ingredient. It's not true. So let's see the next one that pops up. Okay, so we're going to look at these 3 bread labels from the same manufacturer, similar ingredients. They have 3 very different labels. And actually the ingredients on them are almost all the exact same. So you'll see here, there's one that says contains wheat, the far left. Okay, great. Wheat is a major allergen, so it's required to be labeled. The middle label, contains wheat, may contain traces of milk, eggs, soy, and sesame. Okay, well now there's a lot more like cooks in the kitchen here. We don't just have wheat going on, we have may contain traces of 4 other major allergens, even though it's made by the same brand as the first label. And then this label on the far right contains wheat and soy, but is manufactured in a facility that uses sesame seeds. So what's going on? this is really confusing. And this is like a really great example of what people who have food allergies or caring for people with food allergies go through all the time. It says contains wheat, says it might contain, does it contain this? It's really confusing. And it's so confusing, in fact, that a 2021 study found that 75% of food allergy consumers did not understand voluntary labeling. Voluntary labeling are those things that say may contain, manufactured in a facility that uses sesame seeds. It is not regulated, nor is it required for manufacturers to let you know if a product has been made on the same line as another major allergen. They don't have to disclose that because that's not an ingredient in the finished product. And there's also no like baseline amount of allergen required for voluntary labeling. They only have to disclose allergens that are an actual ingredient in the finished product. And there's no differences between different types of voluntary labeling. So like may contain, manufactured in, processed on the same line as, any of those things, they're not regulated. They don't mean, I don't want to say that they don't mean anything, but there's not a standard for what those mean. They're completely voluntary. Manufacturers don't even have to include those at all. There's no guidelines, which is a bummer because then it kind of puts the judgment and the burden on the consumer for trying to decide, like, is that worth it? These are all made by the same manufacturer, so should they all have may contain traces of wheat, milk, eggs, soy, and sesame, even though, like, what do you do? It's really confusing and it's really stressful. So let's talk a little bit more about food label reading. Biggest thing for food label reading is the rule of 3. Every product, every time. Read the food label at the store when you pick up the product. Every time, even if it's a product you bought 100,000 times before, checking it every single time because ingredients change. They change all the time. Like the one dairy-free mac and cheese that I liked that didn't also have coconut in it. I went and I bought it, and then I got home when I was reading the label when I got home to put it away. Well, now I can't eat this because they changed the ingredients, even though I bought it 100 times before. So read the label at the store every time. Read the label when you get home to put the food away. Again, every time. And then check the label again before eating, because sometimes we are reading things really fast at the store. We're reading things really fast when we put it away. And then we go to eat something and like, gosh, why do I feel kind of gross? What's going on? Oh, I must have missed it the 2 other times that I checked. Again, did that the other day with some dairy-free ice cream, took a bite, and I was like, interesting. Had coconut in it, even though I checked it at the store and I checked it when I got home. But I checked it after I ate it, which was not like the right order of doing things. So check it again before consuming. It's also really important to know alternative names for allergens, allergen-derived ingredients, or unlisted or unidentified ingredients. So like for me, caseinite, which is a derivative of milk, is one that is just an alternate name for something that I'm allergic to, but it should be labeled under milk, but sometimes it shows up in complicated ways. Medium chain triglycerides, again, for me, that's made from coconuts. And so I have to be like knowing that that's what that is. Arachis hypogaea is the Latin name, the botanical name for peanuts. And so even knowing the botanical names can be helpful, even though it's just another piece of information we have to store. And then for people who have like non-major food allergens, like I do too, knowing that like kind of these ambiguous terms like food starch could be really important. If you have a gluten allergy or like you have a corn allergy, food starch, what does that mean? For me, vegetable oil is really important because that often includes coconut oil, so I can't have it. And then things like flavors and spices are also big areas where some of my food allergens hide, like black pepper, spices, natural flavors. And also knowing that non-food items can contain allergens, things like medications and supplements, huge sources of allergic reactions are from medications and supplements. And then also cosmetics. So like Burt's Bees chapstick, like first ingredients, coconut oil, that's a no-go for me. So there's a lot of different labeling pieces. Yes, allergic to something in the curry blend. Me too. Black pepper for me. Okay, so food reading is really complicated. Food label reading is really complicated. Here we have a beautiful non-dairy creamer that contains milk. Why? Why? Oh my gosh. This stuff is wild to me because it doesn't actually contain, I guess, like milk itself. It contains a milk derivative that can get away with being a non-dairy creamer. But then if you look too, for me, contains one or more of the following: palm kernel, coconut oil, soybean oil, and then mono and diglycerides is also a lot of time from coconuts. Just fun fact. So packaging can be really misleading. Coconut and soy are actually still considered major allergens, but aren't included in the allergens section or the contains section alongside milk, because for some people there's this, soybean oil shouldn't contain enough protein to elicit an allergic reaction, but some people with allergies choose to still avoid those things just out of an abundance of caution. Okay, so then a really good resource that I like to point people to is FAIR, which is a food allergy. Oh, I say this, I'm like, it's a great resource. And then I'm like, what is their
Research
acronym?
and education.
Yes. It's like, I know, I go to that site all the time. They have a lot of really great helpful hints on how to navigate food allergies too. So if you, like, they have this great list of living with a sesame allergy, what are some ingredients to avoid? And so they can be a really helpful resource. A lot of this is geared towards children and parents of kids who have food allergies. Adult food allergies don't get the love and research that childhood food allergies do, which makes a ton of sense because kids, can't even talk, right? So they need extra care and extra attention for making sure that they're taken care of and safe. So I love FAIR, and they have a lot of really good helpful hints there if you need some extra tips on how to avoid some of those things. But we are going to move into this next portion about food allergens in the kitchen. So I just spent all this time talking to you about like how complicated food label reading is and how scary food allergy reactions can be and uncomfortable. And so like the grocery shopping is stressful. The last thing you want to do is take all this time making sure that the food that you get is safe and then get home and introduce an allergen somewhere else. That can be really stressful. And one of the ways that I manage my multiple food allergies and stress related to food is I cook at home, pretty much, period. I really don't have many options for eating out, so it's necessary for me to do everything at home. But having a little bit of forethought, like meal planning and freezing some stuff and having things that are safe for me to eat at home so I don't have to worry about what my next meal is going to be, is a huge relief. And Amy is going to outline some of like really practical tips and approaches to making sure that all that hard work that you did at the grocery store doesn't end up wasted, and she's going to take it from here.
Thanks. Yeah, so every day, we're all spending a lot of time planning meals or being in the kitchen. And like Susie said, managing food allergies in the kitchen can be really challenging, especially if you're cooking for multiple people and maybe only one person has to avoid certain ingredients or allergens. So your household still has foods containing these allergens in it because everybody else can eat it, and you're just having to avoid for one person. So that's the frame of mind that a lot of our strategies that we're going to talk about are going to be based on. That You're cooking for multiple people, and maybe only one or two people need to avoid that ingredient. So the gentleman in this picture is cooking shrimp in the same pan as some vegetables. So if he's cooking for himself and for somebody who has a shellfish allergy, this is not a safe practice. So over the next several minutes, we're going to define cross contact and review those strategies to prevent cross contact in the kitchen. And if we can prevent cross contact, hopefully that will help reduce some stress. So cross contact, let's define it. Cross contact is the accidental spread of a food allergen from one food to another that was originally allergen-free. You may have heard of the term cross-contamination when reading about or learning about food safety, and cross-contamination is different. Cross-contamination is the spread of illness-causing pathogens or bacteria from a contaminated source to a food. That source of contamination could be dirty hands, unsafe water, raw meat, poultry, or seafood. So in the event of accidental cross contact, the allergen is not destroyed during cooking or preparation. So when it is consumed by somebody that has a food allergy, they may experience that allergic reaction. And as Susie shared, that reaction could be mild to serious depending on the allergy and the person. So this means that the ingredient containing the allergen cannot be simply removed from the rest of the prepared foods because that allergen would have spread throughout the entire dish. So if we think back to the gentleman on the previous screen, cooking the shrimp and the vegetables in the same pan, he can't serve those vegetables to his friend that has the shellfish allergy because the allergen would have spread in the pan when the ingredients were mixed together, because that allergen is not destroyed during cooking. So cross-contamination, just to put it in perspective, if cross-contamination occurs during preparation, proper cooking may kill the pathogen or the bacteria to prevent foodborne illness. But if improper cooking or poor handling continues, there's still that risk of foodborne illness. So cross contact is the allergen, cannot be destroyed during cooking. Cross contamination deals with food, bacteria pathogens that can cause foodborne illness. Okay, so now that we know what cross contact is, let's discuss some potential scenarios. So if you're comfortable, type in the chat some ideas of when you think cross contact can occur in the kitchen. And there's some images up there to give you some hints. Cutting boards, very, very common one. Any others? Deep fryer at a restaurant, yes, yes. We won't talk too much about that because we're focusing on home, but I'll make a comment. So deep fryers at restaurants, some places do not have the space to have multiple fryers. So, they're not going to separate out fish from French fries or, chicken tenders. So really important as the consumer, if you're in a restaurant, to ask those questions. You have that power as the consumer to ask your server or your waiter. If they don't know or they're unsure, ask to speak to the chef, the cook, the supervisor. Don't back down. You have that right to ask. So that's my little soapbox for food service. That is my background before I joined Extension. So yes, that's all I'll say. And then utensils, great. So you guys mentioned a few times that cross contact can occur. So let's talk about some of these in more detail. So in the picture of the individual making sandwiches on the cutting board, Cross contact would occur if the same cutting board was used to make a sandwich for somebody with a wheat allergy. The crumbs from the regular bread cannot be simply brushed off before preparing food, as the allergen could still be on the surface. The way we store foods can also be a source of accidental cross contact. I know for me, after I go grocery shopping or I'm preparing multiple meals, my refrigerator can look exactly like the one on the screen. It is jam-packed. So if attention's not paid to how we're storing food, cross contact can occur. It looks like in this household's preparing for a barbecue, and depending on who's coming to this event, there's potential for egg, dairy, and wheat allergens to have contact as these foods are uncovered. They're very close together, and an accidental spill could cause cross contact. And then cross contact can occur if mistakenly using the same pan or utensils for preparing foods. So the individual in the picture preparing fried eggs must take care to ensure that the pan and the flipper are not used to prepare a different breakfast for a family member or friend. I know I saw in the chat a daycare, or if you're at a child care center and you're preparing meals one at a time. Because similar to the cutting board example, the pan and the flipper cannot just be simply rinsed before next use. And then our hands and our food handling can be sources of cross contact. So there's a lot of ways cross contact can occur. But let's take a quick step backwards from the kitchen and just talk about a couple strategies to prevent cross contact while at the grocery store. So depending on the severity of the food allergies, how we handle foods while grocery shopping can be a source of cross contact. So while grocery shopping, remember safe. So separate foods in bags, baskets, or carts. If you're shopping for multiple people and not everybody needs to avoid certain ingredients, put the allergen containing foods in a sealed bag or a separate basket. Avoid foods from bulk bins, deli counters, self-service stations, because you cannot be sure that everybody handled the foods with the care to prevent cross contact. You know, somebody could have used the same scoop to get mixed nuts and then go get dried beans. Find assistance if you have questions about a product. For example, you know, if you're in the produce section and you have questions about how a food was handled, ask for the produce department supervisor. Again, as that consumer, you have the right to ask these questions and get the answers that you need. And then eliminate cross contact at the checkout by having the cashier scan and bag allergen-free foods first. You can also ask the cashier to clean the conveyor belt before you begin unloading your cart. And by having those allergen-free foods handled first, you're preventing cross contact. So as we identified earlier, you know, how we store foods can prevent cross contact as well. So if you have this space at home, dedicate separate shelves or areas to store allergen-free foods. Store foods in clean, sealed containers to prevent any contact from spills or crumbs. Use labels or color stickers to mark foods as allergen-free. Like with children, picking stickers that are the child's favorite color to mark foods that they can have is a really good strategy. Store leftovers or meal prepped items in specific labeled containers. If you can, designate one color lid for allergen free and another to the allergen containing. You know, I think blue and red lids are pretty common in Tupperware's food storage containers. So, you know, consider blue for your allergen free and red for contains allergens. So using color coding methods can be a really good way to prevent mistakes, especially if you're tired or you're rushing. Okay, so now we have our food and we're ready to cook. So you may be familiar with the importance of hand washing before preparing foods to prevent cross-contamination or spreading germs, but washing your hands before cooking is also a way to prevent cross-contact. So to properly wash your hands, use warm running water and soap, scrub for 20 seconds, and rinse. Dry your hands with a clean towel, and then use that towel to shut off the faucet. It's really important to note that for preventing cross contact, hand sanitizers are not a suitable substitute for hand washing. Hand sanitizers work by killing germs or pathogens on your hands, but they do not break down any food particles. So hand sanitizers are not going to kill an allergen, just like cooking doesn't kill an allergen. So before you begin cooking or preparing foods, and after you wash your hands, step 2 is always cleaning the countertops and food preparation areas with that warm soapy water and a fresh cleaning cloth. The warm soapy water is important because the warm soapy water loosens up any food debris so it can be removed. You just can't brush it off. Avoid using a cleaning cloth to dry the surfaces that's already been used for drying hands or other tasks because it may contain allergens from in the household. And then sponges can also be a source of cross contact. So if you use sponges, it's really important to clean and replace them regularly. And then earlier it was identified that, yep, cutting boards and utensils, those are a very, very common source of cross contact if not handled properly. If you're preparing a variety of foods at one time, consider preparing the allergen-free options first. This way you're eliminating the potential cross contact from your hands, counters, and utensils. And we'll talk more about that in a couple minutes. But if you cannot separate out the tasks, always wash cutting boards and utensils with warm soapy water or get new ones for each task. Just like when cleaning your hands and counters, the warm soapy water is important for properly cleaning as it breaks down the food so it can be removed when rinsing. I mentioned that I have a background in food service, and when I worked in food service, we had designated cutting boards for different tasks, including designated sets for allergen preparation. And the reason for that is, the more you use a cutting board, you'll get those wear and tear, the grooves or the scratches. So, sometimes it can be hard to clean properly. So separating out our sets eliminated that cross contact risk if anything was stuck in a groove. You can also color code utensils. And these two options might be good strategies if you're managing an allergy that's very severe. So if you have designated cutting boards or utensils, consider storing them in a covered container just to prevent any cross contact from spills or crumbs that just may happen in the kitchen. And then 2 other sources of cross contact can be aprons and splatter. If you wear an apron while cooking or baking, think of how easy it is to accidentally wipe your hands on it or have flour go everywhere if you're measuring something. And then splatter as well. Splatter can transfer allergens to other foods. So when cooking, make sure to keep allergen-free ingredients covered or away from other foods while cooking. Okay. So I mentioned the strategy earlier of preparing allergen-free foods first if you're cooking multiple dishes. And this is called conscious cooking. In conscious cooking, you're developing a plan or laying out your steps before you even begin cooking. And the goal is to reduce the potential risk of cross-contact by handling allergen-free food preparation first. So you can use conscious cooking as a strategy if you're cooking multiple dishes, or if you're only cooking one meal at a time, and maybe you only need to omit one or a few ingredients for an allergy-free serving. So on the screen now, this is the general outline for conscious cooking that can help you keep a meal safe. So always starting with washing your hands and cleaning the preparation and cooking areas like we talked about. Then prepare all of your allergen-free ingredients. So measuring if you need to do any dicing or chopping, maybe if something needs to be sauteed first, you're going to do that. So you're preparing all of your allergen-free ingredients, all of those steps, and then you're going to cover until needed. Then clean and prepare and measure all of your allergen containing ingredients. So you've kept everything allergen free, and now you're going to essentially contaminate the space with the allergen ingredients. Once you're done with your allergen ingredients, wash your hands, clean the area, and then you'll prepare the recipe without adding the allergen containing ingredients. Separate out the allergen-free portion, and then add your remaining ingredients, and then wash your hands again one more time before serving that food. So the process involved a lot of planning and some organization before starting, but potential cross-contact was eliminated. So here's a very, very simple example just to illustrate the process. I tried to pick something that it was very apparent of what we're trying to do here. So I'm making cashew chicken stir fry for a group of friends, and one of my friends is allergic to cashews. So I begin with washing my hands and cleaning the space. I gather and prepare all of my allergen-free ingredients like the chicken. I cut up my chicken, I season it, I dice up my onion, and then I gather all of my sauce components and I get everything measured out. I put all of that to the side, I have it separated, and then I prepare my cashews. So I have to chop up my cashews. And then once I'm done, I'm going to wash my hands and clean the space. I prepare, sorry about that. I prepare the recipe without adding the cashews, and then I separate out that one serving for my friend who is allergic to cashews. Then I add the cashews to the original pan, finish that, and then I wash my hands before serving. So again, very, very simple example, but it illustrates how potential cross contact was eliminated at many steps. Did anybody catch a step where we eliminated cross contact? If you did, go ahead and drop that in the chat. Okay, so I prepared all of the allergen containing ingredients last, so I didn't handle the cashews until after I had gathered everything else. I prevented accidentally using the wrong utensil to stir because I didn't have two similar dishes going side by side, which then also prevented splatter. So I didn't have one pan going without cashews and one pan going with cashews on the same stove. That would be extremely easy to use the same utensil to stir, or again, have that splatter go from one pan to the other. Okay, so the conscious cooking process can be applied to meal prepping too. as Susie alluded to, eating out can be very challenging, especially if one has multiple allergens or you're going somewhere new. And meal prep is one way to have allergen-free meals ready to eat at any time. So applying the conscious cooking process, you're preparing and measuring all of your allergen-free ingredients first. Then you're getting your allergen-containing ingredients ready. You're preparing the allergen-free meals and portioning them into containers, and then you're adding the remaining ingredients. Make sure you label and date the containers. Use labels and try the color coding strategies we discussed so nobody accidentally grabs the wrong dish. And then dating the meals with the date you made it is important because it'll help you know how long to keep it in your refrigerator or freezer. Because you devoted all of this time and attention to preparing the allergen-free meals, the last thing you want to do is to waste it. So just a resource for you to use is the Food Keeper app. You can use it as a website, or also you can download it for iOS or Android, and you can look by different categories, and it'll give you a good time frame of how long to store an item. So we covered a lot of information, but now I'll turn it back over to Susie to wrap up before we open it up for questions.
All right. So managing some stressful times with food allergies, like everything with food allergies is stressful because we have to eat in order to be living, right? Like, food is such a constant part of our daily lives. It is there all the time. If you're like me, I'm a snacker. So I'm literally eating a grazer throughout the day. And so when things get stressful, when there's a lot going on, whether it's something with work or family, or just something comes up, or I have a fun thing that I'm excited about, but that can turn stressful with food allergies. A few things I have found to be really helpful are, on top of all this other work that we're doing to make sure that our food stays safe, and potentially meal prepping, whether that's meal prepping for the week so that you don't have to think about what am I going to eat for lunch during the week. We already have it meal prepped. But also freezing portions or leftovers of allergen-free meals, even if it's not enough to make a whole meal out of it, just freeze that bit before it goes bad. Use your Food Keeper thing, make sure that it's safe, right? Freezing that little portion and just having it and knowing oh my gosh, I don't have enough time to make lunch today. I don't have enough time to even eat anything. All I have in my cupboard is snacks. That's not a meal. I'm hangry. What do I do? Freezer. Oh yeah. Past self, thank you for freezing this half a portion of, dairy-free mac and cheese, because now I have at least a good start for a lunch. I can throw some frozen veggies in it. I have a can of tuna, and I can have an apple, right? Just being able to have something that you can even build off of that isn't necessarily a full meal in and of itself is super helpful. Couple extra cinnamon rolls that you made, that you're not really going to eat before they need to be tossed, put them in the freezer. Yourself in 2 months is going to be so glad when you wake up hangry on a Saturday morning and want to go do something, but you don't have your normal breakfast that you would eat. Oh my gosh. And I don't know, what it took me getting food allergies to start thinking that way. I think we should all be doing some of those things anyway to reduce food waste. But it seriously makes my life so much easier. Or even when we were doing stuff for the holidays, I made way too much. We made way too much dairy-free mac and cheese for just me and my husband to eat. I had a whole extra tray of it. And I was like, you know what? I'll put it in the freezer. And I was so glad I did, because I ended up having this week where it was absolutely crazy. And I was able to have that for lunch for a few days, and I didn't have to stress out about it. So just doing those kinds of things in the moment and just making it second nature, your future self will thank you. But also planning ahead and being strategic, whether that means planning ahead and, bringing your own food to an event that probably the catering is not going to be able to be accommodated to you, or you don't feel comfortable. Because the other part is we think about the safety with food allergies, but also the stress part of food allergies. And yeah, they say that it's safe, but Amy just spent 20 minutes telling us how an allergen could potentially be introduced at all these different stages, right? And so a big part of it is the mental safety with food allergens. If you do not feel comfortable eating that food, do not eat it. If, you do talk to the kitchen manager or whatever, and they don't seem 100% sure, you do not have to risk it. You can pass. And so sometimes that means planning ahead, making sure that you have extra food in your car, or the number of times I have brought my own meal to people's weddings and stuff is kind of outrageous. Oh, why are you eating a bagged salad from the grocery store? Because I flew in and I didn't bring a cooler when I want to eat food, and I don't necessarily trust your catering. It doesn't make me feel safe. So protecting your own self, staying safe, making sure that you're protecting your mental health in the food allergy game too is so important. Plan ahead. Have appropriate medication on hand, which is kind of hard because you don't normally get an EpiPen prescribed to you unless you've had anaphylaxis, which is that's a little, behind the curve, but that's kind of what it is. So if you are somebody who needs an EpiPen, carry it with you always, know how to use it properly. If you don't have an EpiPen, would still behoove you to know how to use an EpiPen properly in case somebody ever in your life does need one. And maybe they have one and in the moment they're not able to. So having your appropriate medication, making sure that you're taking your allergy medication as prescribed, because environmental allergies, 'tis the season, right? Environmental allergies can also impact how severe of a food reaction you have, particularly if you cross-react to environmental pollens and that kind of thing. But also just being gracious with yourself. This is something that took me a long time to learn with food allergies, is that you're going to buy the wrong food. I still do. I literally did it 3 weeks ago. That dairy-free coconut containing ice cream that I brought home, took a bite of, and was like, that was dumb. But it's okay because we're human and things happen, and I was fine. Know that there's going to be times where you do cross-contaminate something and you have to start over, or you have to freeze that batch, for the person who can't eat that thing. And that's just part of it. And also being gracious with yourself that it's not your fault that you have food allergies or your kid has food allergies, and you are not a burden for advocating for what you need and what makes you feel safe. You need to feel comfortable making choices for yourself, for your loved ones. And it's okay if you feel like you're being annoying, because you're not. You are doing what is necessary to protect yourself. And that's super important. You're literally, food allergy people are superheroes. And it's really frustrating because we've talked a lot about how the food system in general, from labeling, this voluntary labeling that doesn't really mean anything, to even the ways that food allergies are diagnosed and all these different things. The burden is really on us as the consumers to make the choices that are in our best interest. And so, we have to, it's a lot of burden. It can be really heavy. It can be really frustrating and really stressful. So just know that if you're in that boat, I feel you. You're enough, and you are worthy of being safe and having safe and delicious food to eat. Find friends that make allergy-free food for you, my friends. Amy did such a great example of how actually simple it is with a little bit of forethought to do that. And I've been so blessed that I have friends that have been able to be oh yeah, Susie can't have this, so we'll make what she can have first and she can eat, and then we can make all our stuff later. It's really simple, and it can be done anywhere, camping, at home, in the wild, whatever. So be gracious. Couple take-home points for you before we head out. Big things: check every label every single time. Check it at the store, check it when you get home, check it before you consume it, whether that's food or a supplement or a medication that was even prescribed to you. Check those extra ingredients. every single time. Practice conscious meal prep and conscious cooking. Just a little bit of forethought can make a big difference for people. Continue being hand washing champs. We were hand washing champions before the pandemic. We taught people how to wash their hands because we have to do it to survive, right? Like, continue doing those things. Buy some stock in like hand lotion or something because you're gonna be the ones buying it anyway, right? Keep up that good work, and then take advantage of extra portions, meal prepping, leftovers. Do something today that your future self will thank you for, because it'd be really simple thing you do today could be like, oh my gosh, such a huge relief on a really stressful day in the future. And then we just have a couple little things for you. We are going to throw in the chat a little eval, link to an eval. We would really appreciate it if you fill that out. Oh, Rose, the best, put that eval link in there. You need to make sure that when you are doing the evaluation that you select which webinar it's for. This is under the What's for Dinner, family development ones. And this is the Managing Food Allergies webinar. And then at the end, it's going to ask you if you want a certificate of participation. And then if you're a U of M employee or spouse and you want your well-being points, there is a link after you finish the questions to get your well-being points. And we really appreciate it if you fill those out, and it lets us know like what we could do better, what else you want to learn about. Amy and I are going to send a follow-up email tomorrow, probably, thanking you guys for your time. And hope that you might consider hopping on one of these other webinars that we've got going on. We've got a lot of different topics coming up, and we'll have even more. Like, this is just through August, so lots of different things going on. Thank you so much for being here today. Please find a time to engage with us on Facebook, other places on the internet, Instagram, Pinterest, and I think that's it. We'll send you guys a couple links to some extra resources if you're interested. And you're also always welcome to email me or Amy for any extra questions or thoughts you might have. And hope y'all have a great rest of your Wednesday. Thanks for joining us.